All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cashflow Chronicles. We're here with Mr. Christopher Patel. It's always a great day to hang out and talk to you guys. It is November 14th of 2024. Mr. Patel, you can hear me okay? Just double checking. All right, very good. Muy bueno, as they say, south of the border. As always, subscribing is completely free. And if you feel so to choose to do so, contemplate becoming a member to support the channel. Let's just do a quick rundown. Apple 227 been hanging out. It was flat week over week since we last chatted. Amazon at 210. The Bros pulling back 45.75. Google pulling back to 175. Palantir up about $5 since we last chatted. SPY pulling back from 6,000. The Q's 506. Bitcoin $13,000 since we last chatted at 88,000. Oil hanging out there above $68, just in the 70s if you're talking about it from a Brent crude oil perspective. And then, of course, Henry Hub, natural gas prices. The stuff you heat your stove with, not the stuff you put in your car, $2.74 in the U.S. markets. Mr. Patel, good conversation yesterday with Tanner, by the way. I love his Clark Kent glasses. He always mesmerizes me.
Or the Urkel glasses, whoever you're asking.
Oh, the what glasses?
The Urkel glasses.
Let
me see. Why is my autofocus not focusing? Let's see. All right, whatever. So I remember who it was, but basically, someone was like, "Oh my God, look, it's White Urkel." I think it was Strongman Personal Finance. That dude.
Like, yeah. No barriers to that guy. I love it.
All right, hold on one second. Let me just get my autofocus to focus.
Focus.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. Yeah, man. You know what?
You see somber. You seemed somber. Chris was somber when he joined. Somebody peed in his Cheerios. I'm trying to figure it out.
No one peed in my Cheerios. No, I'm just
not my Cheerios. Sorry.
2025 is gonna be a really, really freaking confusing year. I can't get a read on this guy. Like everything that Trump is doing, it's like throwing me off. Okay, I'll start it off.
Examples, yeah.
This whole thing, like nominating Marco Rubio as Secretary of State,
confusing.
Very confusing, considering that Rubio's like literally a deep state war hawk.
He literally called him Little Marco all the time, didn't he? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's like one thing that's like okay. That's kind of weird to see that kind of power being presented to someone like that. Like, I don't know what the thing was. Some of the other nominations, like this guy for Secretary of Defense, who's a Fox News contributor, Hesketh. I looked at his interview with I think Dave Smith or something. But basically, he is a veteran. He's got 2 Bronze Stars, so he is qualified. He has a background with his pedigree from Princeton and Harvard. So he's not a dumb guy by any means. The only thing is he seems very young and at the same time, maybe a little bit too much of a, how do I say it? Like too regressive for the military. What I mean by that is when you're very, very like open to change and you really are like, I'm going to be an agent of change. What tends to happen is you get a lot of pushback. In the military, the one thing is like you typically want to do things gradually. You want to change things gradually. And I'm not so sure how that's going to end up impacting the military. I mean, I like his ideas. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of, if he does it with like forcefulness, I'm not sure how that's going to impact the readiness of the military. So that one was definitely like, out of the blue. Like, I didn't even know that this guy was in contention to be Secretary of Defense. What are some of the other like ones? I did like the Tulsi nomination to be in charge of DNI. The Robert F. Kennedy being in charge of Human and Health Services was good. The whole Elon and Vivek thing, I like the concept. I definitely think the government needs to cut back. The only thing, what's the economic ramifications of that? That's something that I'd have to be very like I said, you just can't tell whether or not we're going to have inflationary pressures or deflationary pressures, because like it's almost like a counterbalance everything that he's doing. Like on one hand, he's like, let's deport all these illegals, which is fine. I get that. But at the same time, that's going to increase inflation. But then at the same time, you're going to cut back on government spending, which is deflationary. So, okay. And then on the other hand, you're like, raise tariffs on China. Okay. That's inflationary, and but at the same time, housing is going to come down a little bit because, you're going to have all this like, empty homes. But then you also have all these people that you're going to deport because of construction. That's like, I don't know. Like, this just seems like a lot of moves all at one time. That's just throwing me off a little bit and trying to figure out, like, okay, how to invest for 2025, man.
I agree with you. I think the thing that confuses me the most is, and I agree with you on the deflationary pressures from the Department of Government Efficiency. I look at it as, to me, it's a resetting of what has been kind of screwed up over the past few years, in my opinion. And not even just the past few years, right? I'm thinking like decades at this point. I'm not saying like since 2020, since Trump left office. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we've observed from a debt deficit pretty much since Clinton left office of $36 trillion, pretty much. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, yeah, there was like 1 or 2 trillion, I think, after Clinton left office. And of course, we had the wars in the early 2000s associated with what happened on 9/11. And then obviously the subsequent war that happened with the WMDs in Iraq and things of the like. So that just started off things. But since then, we've just been on this deficit of around $1 trillion, if not $1.5 trillion per annum, and we haven't really slowed down. And so, to me, I do think that there's been, how do I say this? I don't remember when I was growing up. Yes, I remember incompetence in the government. I remember, things not being super efficient. But, technology has moved along so far since 2008 with the smartphone being released. But it feels like at the same pace, the government hasn't been modified or modernized. And to me, it's like, I've seen a lot of companies modernize, and the efficiencies that has given them, and the amount of prosperity from a profitability perspective, as well as being able to shrink the workforce perspective. And to me, I want to see that kind of happen to the government as well. I recognize that the government employs over 1 million people. Actually, it's over 10 million people, I think. So like 3%, 3.5% of our population. And then if you think about the working population, it's probably more like 6% of our working population works for the government. I'm not 100% sure on those percentages, but I'm sure it's in the right magnitude.
I'd say the impact of the government is like at least 25%. If you could include all the benefits that get distributed via healthcare to the population, because I mean, remember what ends up happening is the tax. Like if you look at all the entitlements that we have, all the taxes that everyone pays, a lot of that goes towards health and human services like Medicare, Medicaid. Like one of the largest expenses, the medical expenses, and that supports a lot of people and their livelihoods. And then of course you have like unemployment and welfare and all the federally subsidized benefits like different Pell Grants and all this other stuff for education. So if you think about it, spending is definitely tied to prosperity. So if you think about it, the more we spend, the more prosperous people, quote unquote, are from a monetary standpoint, not necessarily in real terms, right? So I think one of the things that we saw was that this constant increase in spending over the last 15 years has basically made people a lot, and companies too. Don't get me wrong. It's not just people. Companies very, very reliant on government contracts as a staple diet of their business, right? So did you see all these companies that got smashed today? That like are main government contractors?
No, but I have seen a slight retracement today on a couple different companies, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, let me show you like some of the main ones that got absolutely hammered today. Because
but I don't necessarily. I mean, I hear what you're saying with respect to you got to spend money to make money. I hear that piece.
Yeah,
but I think at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily about spending less money per se. I think it's about
Mhm.
ensuring that the money goes into the right direction, right? That's part of the efficiency piece, getting rid of the corruption. And,
Yeah.
and to me, I don't necessarily think that, well, Lidos is another company that is a Rocket Lab contributor. So we can talk about that. But
Yeah.
the,
Who's Alan Hamilton? Look at this. Like one of the like a defense software provider took almost a nasty tumble today.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
$30
I
down.
don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we
Yeah.
talk if you think about it from a Palantir perspective, what they talked about, it was Shyam Sankar who basically said over the past however many years, not late 90s, early 2000s, the amount of these independent contractors that were hired by the government to do things has continued to shrink, and
Mhm.
efficiency of things has gotten even worse, and money spent on these items has gotten higher. So
Yeah.
me, it's not generating efficiencies. Like, and then it goes back to launch again. I mean, I hate to use this anomaly, but let me think of two very efficient processes. Two very
Mhm.
efficient processes is like memory chips on computers, like Ohm's law, that basically every 1.5 years, 2 years, you double the ability, or every 18 months, you double the ability of whatever chips you're working on because there's so many people working on it, making them more efficient. You're able to shrink the size, etc. And then what we've been able to see over the past 10 to 15 years with the space race, being able to get the cost of kilogram to orbit down substantially. And if you think about these large government contracts like the SLS and how ULA has previously performed, United Launch Alliance, and a lot of these guys are, I don't want to say bloated, but what ends up happening is, and I see a lot of this happen as well, just being an engineer myself, you have engineers being more like project managers that hire other people that then hire other people that hire another contractor to actually do the work. And so it's
Mhm.
like, well, how many people in that respect are capturing 10 to 20% or even sometimes 30% off the top and then subcontracting that out, and then that person subcontracting that piece out till it finally gets to the local man and actually gets done. And then,
Right.
in terms of that, it's like, how much inefficiency is there in that? How much more money would you be able to spend? How many more oil wells would you be able to drill? How much more research would you be able to put into the silicon, or the factories or the foundries that actually could increase capacity? So I'm not necessarily saying that, everything needs to stop or spending in general needs to stop. But I think that there's just been so many people that have been able to sit back and get easy money that
Yeah.
needs to be relooked. The inefficiency of how we spend our money. They quoted it at over $200 billion last year. And I think Elon's right. I think it's way higher. I think I guarantee there's $1 trillion of excess spending per annum that could be washed out and people wouldn't even notice. And it
Mhm.
reminds me of that Carl Icahn speech of like when he talked about when he bought the rail car business. You ever heard that one?
No, what was
He
it?
bought like
What's
a
this
rail
one?
car owner business back in, like, I don't know, it was
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I remember where he went there and he spoke to one guy. Like, so basically he went there and he hired a consulting firm and asked them like, what are the, like, where can I strip out costs? Like, what do these guys do? And he's like, I have no clue, Mr. Icon, like what these guys do. So then he spoke to this one guy who's actually doing the work. And he says, you can let go of like 13 floors and I'd still be fine, you know? And that's exactly what Icon did. And it became really profitable. And, it did. Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. There's a lot of bloat out there. The problem, though, Matt, is that if you look at it from an economy standpoint, if you do one removal, it will, of course, be a great thing. The problem is when you do it on mass, it can have serious economic ramifications. And the thing is, there is a period of digestion that economy has to go through in order for us to come out better on the other side. So, who was it? Was it Jim Rickards who spoke about this? But he said basically 2025 might be that that speed bump year where people are everything is reorganized right and left, and a lot of people are laid off, a lot of efficiencies are being brought in, but we'll be better better for it the years after that, like 2026, 7, 8, 9, whatever. And we just, like I said, we adopt a better way of doing things. But in the quest of doing better things, we're gonna get a bit of a hit. So
Yeah, I mean, we could take the conversation in many different ways. I mean, one of the things that I was chatting about with somebody the other, like, they were very anxious, and there's a lot of people that I think are very like, I need to find the next big stock. I need to do this. I need to do that. Matt, this person is, because they've been listening to me, and obviously you and I share a lot of the same views on a lot of different things. They've gotten home run after home run after home run for the past 18 months. And so they just assume that's what you need to do, right? But I just want to say that while we have been well in our picking of companies, we have also benefited from an extremely bullish market over the past 2 years. And so I think a lot of people might have hot hand syndrome and think that they can do no wrong and things of the like. But what I want to tell people, and we can take it down this avenue, we don't have to take it down this avenue. I was talking to this gentleman, and a little bit older than me. And I said, I was just like, they're convinced they need $8 to $10 million to be able to retire and like live a good life and things of the like. And I was like, after you pay off your house, I was like, how much do you actually need? They're like, well, I need $100,000 a year. And I'm like, which I think is probably okay. I mean, you don't have the $2,000 to $3,000 a month for a housing payment, and all you have to do is pay taxes on the house. Then I agree, $100,000 is probably a good chunk of change, right? Like, it's, in that respect, $8,000 to $9,000 a month, and that's a pretty good amount of money if you don't have a mortgage, which to most people is probably 30% or so of their take home. And so I was having this conversation with him, and I was just like, well, where are you at in terms of your retirement and everything? I'm like, dude, you're already halfway there. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm nowhere near $8 to $10 million. And I'm like, my guy, if you need to make $100,000 a year and your time horizon is 15 to 20 years and you're at X, I was like, you don't need to get $8 to $10 million, my guy. I was like, let's talk about this. I was like, rule 72. I was like, 15 years. I was like, take 72 divided by, this person didn't know about the rule 72. For those of you guys who don't know what the rule 72 is, it's basically if to find out how many times or how quickly you can double your money using a certain rate of return, or if you have, say, a certain amount of years, if you want to double your money in 10 years, 4 years, etc., you can use this. So in this particular case, I was like, yeah, 15 years. I was like, you're already halfway there. So I was like, let me give you some food for thought. I was like, take 72 divided by 15. What's that return? It's about 5%. So I'm like, okay, on average, if you just assume the market's going to give you 5% and you're still contributing to it, in 15 years, you're going to have more than the amount of money that you need. And so I think I was just like telling him, I was like, you don't need to be focusing on these extreme investment scenarios where you're trying to be, the next Warren Buffett and try to make 20% per year. I was just like, if you come back to me and say you want to do it in 5, I was like, we need to have a different conversation, right? You want to double your money in the next 5 years. I was like, then you're probably going to have to beat the S&P. We're going to have a conversation on how much money you're going to save, etc. But I was like, if you're talking about just doubling your money in the next 15 years, then, just relax. Like, give yourself a sigh of relief. You've done it. You know what I mean? And just coast and enjoy life, hang out with family, and don't stress about money. You're fine. And so I think people just still refuse to have a plan, especially, and this is why when you and I come on here, we're talking about our plan, we're talking about this, that, and the other, but I still think that people just need to go back and think about what their plan is, where they are. Not everybody is like where I'm at, where, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z before I'm 40. Some people might be willing to work until they're 55, 60, 65, and they might be in a completely different trajectory, time horizon, etc. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. We can dive deeper into that later in the show. But I think a lot of people assume they have to be the next Warren Buffett, when in reality, they just need to save 15 to 20% per year and not be stupid and lose money. And I think a lot of times that's what ends up happening is people don't save enough and then they lose money. Go ahead.
Check out what I have. So this right here is generally the chart that, that lets you know, like, okay, this is where my risk is compared to the total return that I could possibly get. And the thing is, you could of course juice this up, in either direction, but money market, least risky, and government treasuries, right? So if you're staying in US treasuries, there's very little risk because, their AAA creditors are always going to get paid, blah, blah, blah. So least amount of risk, but it's also the least amount of rewards. Historically, the problem is right now, and I'll go through it in a little bit, this whole thing has been thrown off. Investment grade bonds, once again, this is still correct. Right now, you can get a pretty decent return from investment grade debt right now. You could buy investment grade corporate bonds and get a good 7 to 10% return, and you're taking on little to no risk. Okay. Especially if you look at some of the corporate bond funds out there, they're awesome. Like, you just buy it, you don't have to think about anything. You're just going to get paid. You're not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to go, oh my God, but you're also not taking a lot of risk. Then, of course, blue chip, large cap, your Googles, your Microsoft, the bigger names out there. This is where you're taking on a little bit more risk, but you're also getting more return, right? Then come small cap equities, which are now starting to slowly catch up. So that's why a lot of people right now are like piling into some of the more smaller cap names, because they're seeing like these multi-year runs, and it's like, I need to get in this now. And so the problem is the risk is, it's starting to get really high. And then, of course, there's emerging markets where you've got the most amount of risk relative to the return. The challenge, though, is that this curve right now makes no sense. Like, this is your traditional normal curve, right? The problem is, from a valuation perspective, this whole curve has been thrown off. This and this, in my opinion, are still accurate. Blue chips have run up so much right now that their actual risk for total return can be flipped to being here, right? Emerging markets could probably be where the small caps are, and small caps could probably be right here in where blue chips are. And you can kind of see that in the equity risk premium that's in the market right now with the total returns. Let me see. Hold on. Total returns, like corporate returns, like let me see if I can find, not this one. Let me find it, and I'll bring it back. Damn it. Let me see. Basically, what this does is it shows you like what the risk. I'll find it and I'll post it, but it's basically showing that if you currently buy certain businesses, the earnings yield that's what it was. Hold on one second. Earnings yield, SP 500. Okay. Here we go. For the S&P 500, the earnings yield is literally at one of the lowest points. So it's at 3.29%. So what does this mean? That means that if you take all of the S&P 500, right, combine it all together and do a yield calculation, you're basically yielding a return, an earnings yield of about 3.29%, which means, you're kind of at a high point in terms of valuation. So this is something to be careful of, because if you think about it, on the bond side, if you're getting 4.5% on the 10-year, and the equity side, you're getting 3.29, but the risk is higher in the S&P 500 than the bonds are. It pays to be in the bond side a little bit, So I don't know. Like, this is something that I've been watching, and just making sure that everyone is covering their bases. But right now, usually when things become really undervalued, usually you'll see is that earnings yields will jump. Like, that's when like, hey, look, we're in a really undervalued market. So yeah, I wonder if I could find this on a forward basis, because that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we were trying to say is everything kind of runs off of a mean, right? And yeah, there you go. Yep, there you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you multiply it against like the growth rate, then it's something to also consider. So what tends to happen is sometimes the earnings growth rate comes down significantly when things are overvalued. So if you look at the year 2000, right? In the year 2000, the growth rate was about 32%, and then all of a sudden it dropped down 50% in the great financial crisis. I mean, not great financial crisis, sorry, the tech bubble bursting. Then again in 2003, it was at a really, really fast pace. But then after that, it kind of started to like moderate. And then great financial crisis, it sank down. So it's this cycle that you have to just keep an eye on. And I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know what the hell is going to happen next year. And so strategically, how to position yourself in an unknown market is be defensive. Go defensive. That's what I'm doing. I'm seeing three things. I'm seeing valuations at really high points on most of the large cap and super majors, but they are good businesses that have strong fundamentals. So the likelihood is you're not going to see like Google and Amazon and Microsoft and these guys drop down significantly. Like I don't think you're going to get a 30% correction on them. What you might see is a flattish year for them while earnings are catching up. Right. So that's one. All the other companies in the S&P 500, some of them might take a hit, in which case then the market will kind of dip a little bit. But then you also have all these small caps, which might catch a bid and rally a little bit. So I think overall next year is not going to be a bad year, but it's not going to be a good year. So it's going to be a lot more flattish. What do you think about that theory?
I think it's just going to be volatile, not necessarily because of what you're saying, but coupled with it. And the reason why I think it's going to be volatile, I think it's very easy to determine. We've had 2 rate cuts for the last two meetings for the FOMC. What might actually be very surprising is people are actually leaning towards a 50-50 shot, whether or not we need one here in the December meeting. So in about a month. So I think that's pretty interesting. I just assumed, based off of where we were pre-Trump getting back and being president-elect, I think everyone was kind of sitting in the boat of, okay, 3 meetings left in the year, 3 cuts. Now, of course, Uncle Donnie's back in office. People are kind of getting a little bit more weary. And so I think it's going to add more to that anxiety of what is the FOMC going to do. I think based off of where everyone was at in kind of September-ish last, I guess just like 2 months ago, everyone just assumed that we were headed to 3.25%, 3.5%. In terms of the terminal funds rate and kind of hanging out and maybe we'll get to 3. But right now, I think that's being thrown in the air with the 10-year an absolute, in my opinion, confused land at almost climbing back to close to 4.5%. I don't necessarily know. Anybody knows what the hell's going on. So I kind of see what you're saying, right? It's things are being shaken up, and with that, it's like, well, markets have kind of pumped in the short term due to maybe lower business taxes and maybe some of the thoughts about efficiency and focus on particular sectors rather than other sectors. That's seen some pumps in certain directions. I think what you will see is some of that volatility. And while I've been thinking about 2025 being volatile, and I still have certain stocks that I think will persevere through that, but of course they'll still have their volatility in between earnings reports and things of the like. I think it's going to be volatile for more reasons now, and so I'm with you in respect to. I don't think with Trump or Donnie being back in office in January, it's going to be less volatile than with a Kamala. I don't know. I think. It might be hard to say. I still have yet to think through everything. I know for my industry, I'm kind of worried from an oil's price perspective. It's going to be more regulatory available to drill, which means likely to continue to drill for longer and at a cheaper cost. But at the same time, that means more supply. More supply means demand has to increase faster. Demand is not there at the moment. China's going to. So anyway, I don't want to go necessarily down that rabbit hole, but I'm trying to work it through each individual sector and see where things will get better or worse in this particular administration. Obviously, solar is going to take a hit. I think nuclear will be one thing that gets kind of pushed forward. Space, I think, will do well in this administration. I don't know. Although defense in the short term might take a hit, in the long term, I think defense will be fine due to the fact that you still need to buy fighter jets from Lockheed, etc. And I think if anything is telling, we saw defense stocks do well under Trump's first administration. So there's that piece. But I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. It's adding confusing notes to the markets, and it's adding more volatility. It's atypical of things that have been done in the past, and so I think with that it'll add more volatility.
I always find this one thing from BlackRock to be like a good measure of like how things usually work out. So this right here, if you see, have you ever seen this before from BlackRock? What they publish?
No, but I've seen a rendition.
Okay, so this is the total return per year of different asset classes, right? So if you look at like 2015, the best performing asset class was Japan. Like if you bought Japanese equities, you were up almost 10%. US equities underperformed that year, so it was only up 1.3%. But if you look overall, everything was just a really shitty year. Like the total return was just really not that great. What I like is when they do this right here, like I'll show you in a minute, but basically what happened the year after that, the total US equity returns were 11%. And then after that, it was like, where was it? US equities was 21%, but all this other stuff was rallying super hard in 2017. So I always find that you usually have these 3 years of like weirdness and then things kind of like catch up eventually. So as an example, like in 2019, we had a move up of 31%, and then 21% the year after, and then 27%. But then in 2022, we had that massive correction and we were down 20%, right? So in 2023, US equities rallied 27%, US equities rallied 21%. It could end up being a three-way thing again, where you see US equities up another like, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 20%. And then 26 might end up being like the negative 20 year. I don't know. It's such a weird thing to see the dynamic. So for me, whenever I see this, the first thing I do is just, okay, where are their value? Like this year, the place to be was Chinese equities. Like Chinese equities right now, they're suffering a little bit, but overall, if you got in early in the year because of all the stimulus that, or quote unquote, they announced, Chinese equities did really well towards the latter half of the year. Infrastructure was up 18%. REITs were up 13. So it went from 11 this. So each one of these things, they kind of like sit in these ranges, and especially when you like do relative to zero, you can see which sectors usually do like really well and which ones like don't do as well. So in 2018, the asset class that actually outperformed was cash. If you just sat in cash, you did better than the rest of the market, right?
You said in 2018?
Yeah, 2018.
That's because we started raising interest rates again in the middle of 2018, if you remember. And
by
Christmas time, we were down like 20-25%.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question is, are we going to be in that same hole next year with the Fed raising if we get reinflation, right? So if a lot of the policies that come by and you start to see the Fed kind of pivot into that, I mean, what you're seeing right now is the Fed just saying, look, maybe we don't need as many cuts. That's another thing to consider too. Because if the Fed doesn't, like right now, the market is under the impression that with Trump in charge, we're going to see like a lot of business growth policies, and with a backdrop of a more with a more favorable interest rate environment. But now the Fed is saying, oh, maybe we don't need it, and then you're also seeing a little bit of inflation reemerge. I think October was just one data point. I wouldn't trust it. I think that there's probably going to be a lot more disinflation coming in 2025. But once again, if some of the policies that Trump enacts, if they cause inflation, then what are we going to do?
But I think some of it, I don't know. It's a catch-22, right? Because if there is, let's just say, oil's coming down, so that is a tailwind for I guess disinflation. I won't say deflation, but it's a tailwind for disinflation because obviously transport will come down in that respect. But I'm trying to think. I mean, what other policies? I mean, if you think about it, this is the way I look at it. If you're charging less in corporate taxes, your year-over-year need to increase the prices of your goods sold doesn't necessarily have to go up, and yet you make more money, right? So, I mean, if your corporate taxes continue to extend or even lower, previously, if you had higher corporate taxes, your rate of inflation likely to go up. Now, if you have this additional 4 to 5% wedge that you were paying in taxes that no longer is there, and it's going towards your bottom line, you don't feel, in my opinion, the need to raise prices. In my opinion, that is disinflationary. I don't necessarily think it's deflationary, unless you start to have a place where, I don't know, what are some key regulatory things that would absolutely make prices of stuff go extremely down the tubes? Like, I'm trying to think of like something that you can cut that's super in a highly regulated environment, that if you were able to cut some of those regulations and make them either simpler or what have you, would cut the costs absolutely dramatically, and that would have like a knock-on effect throughout the entire economy. Can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but
I
I
can
think one
tell
of the
you,
things.
I can tell you quite a few. Like I've personally experienced, like healthcare spending. There's a lot of regulations behind healthcare spending that they're there to basically prop up the bureaucratic machine rather than actually get people healthcare. I'll give you some
But
examples.
in that one,
Yeah,
before you, because I appreciate you, and I know that you have a lot of other examples.
yeah.
That is one of the things that I'm still curious if Trump has a plan for, other than maybe the FDA stuff with RFK. I mean, it seemed like he doesn't. I mean, you heard it straight up in the debate with Kamala. Like, he hasn't really thought of a full-fledged plan with respect to replacing Obamacare. And do I think Obamacare is perfect? No. In fact, I think healthcare service has gone down drastically since Obamacare has been involved. And I've talked to
It's
several doctors that are very confused as to how involved they want to get, with respect to it, because I think they feel like they have less control due to the insurance companies having their fingers a little bit more into it. But I'm curious about what your other thoughts are. And granted, I just want to say I know nothing about healthcare, obviously. So I'm sure I'm speaking out of my butt on that.
so anything government supported or government related, you typically end up there's this I don't know why it happens this way, but you end up getting into this government bureaucracy bullshit. And I've seen this with healthcare where there's more administrators within the healthcare system than there are people to actually do the frontline work. Right. So, as an example, like, okay, insurance companies, you know, if you need a certain surgery or you need certain imaging done, because I work in imaging, so I can tell you, there are so many roadblocks that are put in between you getting imaging and the cost if you just had gotten the imaging would be cheaper. So as an example, like let's say you go to a hospital and you need imaging done like an MRI. Well, right now our current healthcare system is you have to go to your primary doctor who then sends you to a specialist, and then the specialist basically does like a pre-author, like an authorization for you to get an MRI, and then you have to go and you have to get an appointment for the MRI, and then the insurance may or may not pay for it. You have to justify it, and basically the entire process is slow walk because the insurance companies they make their margins by basically not letting people have as many services, right? So if you pay for health insurance and you don't use it, that means that now you get, they make more money and they make a profit, right? So their incentive is to try to get you to use your healthcare a lot less. Well, healthcare coverage a lot less. So they put up all these roadblocks. And the problem is, in order for us as hospital systems to compensate for these roadblocks, what we do is we have to hire people. Like we have to get people to do the pre-authorization. Like my sister-in-law is a physician right now, and she was trying to get one of those like diabetes monitoring things for one of her patients. And dude, the amount of runaround that she got, like she as a physician spent sometimes hours calling the insurance company just to get them to approve something. And I'm like, why is a doctor having to sit there and try to justify what the patient needs for hours on end because the insurance company doesn't want to pay for it, right? And the thing is, there are so many layers of bureaucracy that are being put in place that it's a very, very inefficient system. And I'm sure people here in the healthcare system, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, whether you've been a patient or whether you've been on the working side, and it's sad. It's really sad. The other thing is just how stupid some of the charges are at the hospital system. So if you go to the hospital, like my father-in-law had heart surgery. Do you know what his bill came out to be? Like
150,000.
no, I think it was like some freaking ridiculous number. I have to ask my wife, but it was like over six figures, right? Now the thing is, the insurance company is definitely going to take care of a good portion of that. We had to pay the deductible, which is fine. We did. Now the face level billing is stupid. It's like, oh look, it's like $600,000 for the surgery. Yeah, but you paid the hospital like, about I think like 20% of that, which is what the hospital deserves. But on the face value of it, they charge this crazy high thing so that they could say like, oh look, like we are it's a ridiculous thing. So a lot of times what ends up happening is there are systems that are put in place where they overinflate charges to de-inflate charges and then act like, oh look, I saved you all this money. So do an EKG, that shit costs a lot for no reason. Yeah, exactly. An EKG is literally they hook you up to a bunch of leads, they look at the thing, and it gives you a printout, and sometimes it's electronic right there, and the radiologist looks at it. It takes 3 minutes, and it's like $2,000 for an EKG. It's like ridiculous. So.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think things have gotten just in terms of healthcare inflation and costs associated with that. I think it's been one of the worst if you look at it on comparison against everything, as well as just. And I think this is actually something that will help in the long term as well, which was fighting the cost of tuition at universities.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I think a lot of times, like, I want to know where a lot of that money goes, like, because there's no way that you have all these, and I think a lot of it might go to research, but how efficient is that research?
No,
right?
it's going to all these people who have these fancy titles like vice president of, cement studies. But it's like, wait, do you actually do any research? Like, no, I just manage all the people that work in cement studies. And it's like, how many administrators do you need to study cement?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, you think about it, but I want to touch on one that I think could be worthwhile to investigate into, because obviously I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, have seen some of RFK Jr.'s like yellow dye number 5 videos and things like that have come out. I'm curious, Chris, do you think that the removal of that and the impacts of, say, restricting some of that, like some European countries have done, will eventually in turn raise costs for some of these food companies, snack companies, etc., and then that obviously would be inflationary as that would get passed on to the consumer? Is that, or things like that, what you're referring to when you think that there's going to be a rise in inflation? Or do you think it's just the fact that the economy will be too buzzing with further corporate tax cuts? Or, I mean, can you pinpoint some of the more things like that you are thinking about that are specifically going to cause the inflation? Or is it strictly just,
well, that's one of them, getting all this shit. But see, here's the thing, each one has a counterpoint. Like, okay, so the government allows all these companies to put this shit into our food, right? In which case it makes us unhealthy. If it makes us unhealthy, makes us more prone to diseases, which means that now the government is spending all this extra money on government, on healthcare. So it's like a fucking cartel, get people sick, and then they end up living off of that sickness now. It's such a weird scenario, man. So I don't know, like in face, this may cost the food producers and these, these big brand companies like Kellogg and stuff, but it might end up bettering our healthcare overall. Like, how many times have you gone to Europe, right? Like I've seen this multiple times where someone will eat like a whole thing of pasta and they don't feel sick at all. It tastes amazing. Everything is good. But then you come here and you have that same dish of pasta made the same exact way with ingredients that were like US sourced. And that shit is like, you feel bloated. You feel freaking like, this disgusting feeling. And you can see it in the weight of the people too. Like if you look at Europe, the Europeans, they eat just like us, but they don't gain weight. I don't know what it is in our system that's crazy that maybe RFK is onto something. So
It might be, yeah, it might just be some of these small things like MSG, and I don't know. I think as well, like I do think that soda is definitely more prominent in the U.S. than it is in Europe. But I still see, I don't know. I try to observe it because I now do a little bit of travel in the UK, and I notice it as well. Like I don't get as much bloating and stuff like that if I go out for a week or two to London, even though I'm most of the time eating out because I'm living out of a hotel. Um,
mm,
so I try to scratch my head a little bit. Coffee tastes very different, so you have all these different things that you're sitting there like, interesting. Different countries, man, they just do stuff differently. Like I remember for the first time I landed in Trinidad, I went to go get some milk because sometimes I like cereal in the mornings, especially on the weekends if I don't have to run into the office. Generally, I don't eat breakfast. But on the weekends, I like to, or on Fridays when I have time off, I like to have some cereal. And I'm like going down the aisle, and I'm like, why isn't this milk refrigerated? Why is it sitting in the middle of the aisle? Like it was very confusing to me. And it's because it's pasteurized, right? Like versus in the US, all the milk is kind of sitting in the refrigerated section, and same thing with eggs, right? Like we do something to our eggs. We wash the coating on the eggs off. So that way they have to be refrigerated versus in Europe, they don't necessarily have to be refrigerated. They can be kept on the counter. So there's small things that are kind of reverse. And that's why some people are like, they poke fun at America for a lot of these things because sometimes we're a little bit behind.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that like there definitely has to be a re-examining of what's going on. I don't believe that people in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s had like a much better diet than we have right now. I think we're eating this. In my opinion, I think we're eating the same amount, but the food has become cheaper and cheaper um, relative to inflation. But at the same time, it's because it's been more and more unhealthy. But the thing is that cost has just been transferred from paying for food to paying for healthcare, So it's like you're gonna pay either way. You're gonna either pay in better food and then you're gonna get worse outcomes with healthcare, in which case now that money goes there. So I think what it is maybe we should just eat better food. Maybe we should have higher quality food in the US. So
Yeah.
see,
No,
I'm
100%.
lactose in the US milk, but if I drink in Mexico, I have no problems. Yeah. I trust me, I feel it, man. I feel you guys. That's very it's I don't know. Well, I mean,
So
these
in
are the
that sector,
yeah.
you see inflation. What's the next one that you see inflation?
Um, another one to look at is goods and services like cars. Like cars right now are starting to kind of like come down a little bit, but the thing is, there's a lot of parts that are made in Mexico and then they're shipped over here to the US, right? And I think Trump is trying to go after Mexico with tariffs now too. So right now we have a free trade agreement with Mexico, but that may not hold, especially because of this whole immigration thing. That's one. Construction. Like honestly, you're from Texas. Do you ever go onto a construction site and seen like non-Hispanics working there? Like especially like who've probably just crossed the border not too long ago.
No, I mean I was just talking about this with my buddy because I have a small business idea that we might pull from the South, something that's very prominent in the South, but you don't see it much in the Northeast. But anyway, different story for a different day. And I was just telling him, like, generally speaking, Latinos, whether or not they're legal or illegal, I don't know, nor do I really care. But they frequent these shops, and they're there very frequently. And I was like, and so it allows them, basically what they are. They're just ice houses, like small little ice houses that make ice, and you can fill up coolers with them. You can
Yeah,
fill
yeah,
up
I've seen those
water,
things.
etc. Yeah, so
Yeah,
they're more prominent in the South than they are in the Northeast, and so you see a lot of construction workers, landscapers, etc. early in the morning going there because shit, why make your own refrigerator do all that work if you could just
yeah,
do it a lot easier and get it for a couple bucks? Then fill up your entire cooler, right? So
yeah,
um, this makes things a little easier. But I agree with you. I mean, I see a lot of the employment of, let's just say, more low cost work, more specifically outdoor hard labor being done by Latinos, whether it's landscaping, construction. They're building houses right behind me, and
yeah.
I'm pretty certain I've seen only Latinos, never any any Caucasian or Black or Native American or anything like that. Seems to me like all Latinos, and they're always playing good music too. I love that.
I mean, the point is immigration, like, and it's generational. Every generation, as they come here, they build the country and they make it better. And that's what happens. Like every generation has, like, every generation of illegal immigrants pays the price, and then eventually their kids become citizens, and then they become like the new American populace, right? Um, yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. I'm looking at all of this stuff. Roofing saw one Caucasian dude, all the rest hardworking Latinos. What is that supposed to mean, Crossroads? You saying the white dude was just chilling and the Latinos were all working? See that? You see how you racist as hell, man. Or against white people. That's messed up, Crossroads.
Messed up. How could you?
How could you? Oh man.
I don't know, man. I see where you're coming from. I could see an avenue where things get more expensive. But at the same time, I think so. I think where you're coming from is if these tariff things are real, and I think that's where you're kind of heading with respect to the consumer goods like cars and things of the like. So if those tariffs are real and we actually start to have 25, 50% import tariffs on, let's say, Toyotas, then obviously the price of the Toyota is going to go up. But I don't think that's necessarily it, right? I think that there's a piece of they can also bring those jobs into the United States. Yes, in the short term, it might be more expensive, but if you have a lot of labor competition for, let's just say now, I don't know, I'm just going to have a hypothetical situation and it could be completely wrong, and that's okay. I'm just going to throw it out there. But let's just say you lay off 20 to 30% of the government workforce that, let's just be honest, is probably extra that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And now you have all this excess work. Well, if you have on-sourcing of, say, plants here in the US for Mercedes, Toyota, etc., you have the opportunity for those folks to go work there instead, right? And I don't necessarily think those are bad jobs, right? They think they pay relatively well, high 70, $80,000, and sometimes they can cross over to the six-figure marks. And once again, I'm very ignorant on how much those jobs pay, but I generally speaking think that those entry level, I don't want to say entry level, those auto working jobs are higher than the average U.S. salary, right? So to me, and generally speaking, our union, so they always have favorable rights and make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of in that respect. So to me, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bad thing. I think it's less about being screwed over by other countries, being able to be more self-sustaining, which right now, especially with denationalization, deglobalization, sorry, not denationalization, deglobalization, and everyone kind of fending for themselves, I think it's an okay thing. But even still, if you talk about deglobalization, what we've seen over the past 3 to 4 years since the pandemic, the rise of the, what's the word I'm looking for? BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. You've seen that kind of rise and people wondering if the end of the petrodollar is near, etc. But yet here you have this new administration where Uncle Donnie's getting called up being like, hey, we want to buy more American gas instead of getting it from Russians. Hey, Russians are willing to potentially settle and end the war. Zelensky willing to talk with Elon and Trump. So these are all positive things for globalization and will hopefully lead to freer trade, unlike this segregation that we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years where wars are here, wars are there. India and Russia are trying to act like they're not really together, but in reality, they're getting cheap oil, so they are together. You have China and Russia. What's the word I'm looking for? Conspiring against the United States because of what's going on with the sanctions. Russia's willing to trade back in the U.S. dollar again if things kind of proceed with de-armament of the troops in Ukraine. I think these are all positive things for not just the United States but the world. And so I don't necessarily think that that's going to be inflationary. And that's where I'm a little bit stuck with what you're saying, respectively, of course. And you obviously have a very bright mind. You probably know way more about the economy than I do. But to me, that re-globalization compared to where we've been over the past 2 to 3 years, to me, is deflationary, not inflationary.
Wait, so you think Trump is going to usher in re-globalization? Because all his rhetoric seems to be deglobalization, putting up trade barriers, hiring more American, doing more things America first. Like that sounds like deglobalization to me, putting America first.
Then why is the EU calling us for our gas? Why is Russia saying the EU called us and they say we need more natural gas. We want to buy it from the United States. We don't want to buy it from Russia.
Yeah, I guess
more
that.
LNG.
That's
globalization.
One
okay, and then Russia says we're willing to trade in the U.S. dollar again, not the ruble.
No, well, first of all, the whole thing with globalization means trades of goods and services all across the planet, not necessarily just between one or two countries. I mean, if you think about it, the Europeans, by getting Russian gas, was globalization, and by shifting supplies to the U.S. to get supplies from them, they're not deglobalizing. I mean, they're not reglobalizing. All they're doing is just shifting their supply chains, right? It doesn't mean that they're. I'm talking about literally putting up trade barriers of goods and services coming into the United States. That seems to be deglobalization. Whereas before we've been like, oh, whichever market produces the cheapest content, let them be the main guys that, support us. Like, here's an example, like solar, right? Solar is deglobalization, where if the Chinese do a much better job of producing solar panels than we do, so we've accepted that the Chinese are going to be the ones that manufacture it, and it's going to be imported into the United States. That's globalization. So same thing with us. It's going to be a tit for tat thing. So like right now we put sanctions on China. China says to us, sorry, your companies can't operate in our country without getting all sorts of harassment. But see, this is where I'm also confused too, because you've got Elon.
That's the thing. Before you move on to that next point, Trump is basically saying, from what I'm understanding, and once again, I can be wrong on this, he's saying, look, if you don't play our way, you don't accept your American goods, you're going to get tariffs, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to basically have to pay 25, 50%. Now, that doesn't mean that has to happen, right? Trump is all about making deals. So just like how the same thing happened when the famous discussion of what he talked about with Tim Cook. Tim Cook was like, look, we can't pay a 25% tariff. We're going to get eaten alive by Samsung. And he said, look, you don't have to. Just build a couple plants in the U.S. and I'll let you guys go, right? You don't have to, if you build a couple plants in the United States, I won't charge you the 25% for building your phones in China and then trying to bring it back to the U.S. And that's the stuff I'm talking about. That's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you think about how that then will allow them to, in some cases, say they want to start importing Xpeng cars or something like that into the United States. Trump's going to be like, not unless you pay some sort of tariff. It's like, well, what if we accept Tesla cars or this, that, or the other, right? And I know that there's already the Shanghai, but I'm just using an example. I think to me that means we're going to be more playing with others well versus what we've been doing. You think that us sanctioning Russia is globalization? That's not global. That's the exact opposite. Everybody's been up in arms. India has been India and China have been pushing away the United States. At least when Trump won president-elect, Xi Jinping wrote, President Xi called up and had a conversation and wants to play ball again. To me, that's globalization versus the past 3 to 4 years. A whole relationship with China, in my opinion, and horrible propaganda as well. Like the propaganda on the news showing how awful and how and granted, yes, I know things in China aren't perfect, but things are pretty shitty here in the U.S. too, and have been for the past 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm at a point right now where, oh my God, the hell! Look at this thing, man. Like, oh, dude. You see this? Iliana posted this in Twitter. Basically, he's got like a coffee thing where you can like, volunteer symbols. This guy.
Could be you, man. Could be you.
No, thank you. I'm okay. Yeah, this is the thing, man. I'm confused, man. I don't know what to like. I know that some of the people in the comment section, you're absolutely right. He is trying to basically put up these threats, right? I totally agree with that. And that he might not go through with it. But the thing is, like, you can't risk that. Like, I wish we had some more surety that these were just empty threats and there weren't like serious things that he would end up doing. But I mean, you know what? We're not going to know until next year, right? This is the challenge with investing. There's no like, I really don't know what he's going to do. Is it just going to be empty threats and they'll actually be able to negotiate a deal? Or is it actually going to be like warfare on an economic scale that we haven't seen before?
I don't know, man. And what I will say is, from a corporate perspective, maybe you see this in the hospitals, maybe you don't. I'm seeing more stuff moving to Kuala Lumpur. I'm seeing more stuff move to Turkey. I'm seeing more stuff move to India, Pune specifically. And so, to me, is it such a bad thing that we figure out a way to bring back some of those jobs and make it worthwhile to keep them in the U.S.? I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of money that leaves the United States. And with that, if you're a net importer, to me, I don't want to ever be a net importer of anything. Granted, I know we're able to do something very efficient, which is be a net exporter of like software and internet companies. So I think in that respect, we obviously have some companies that are bigger than some GDPs of nations at this point, which is actually pretty astonishing because not many people have GDPs in the trillions, but here we have companies that are worth three, almost going on $4 trillion, and not just one, but multiple, right? I mean, you think about, I forget what the GDP of the UK is, but I think it's like $3 to $4 trillion. And so if you think about it, some of these companies are bigger than the entire economy of the United Kingdom. So in that respect, I would like to see manufacturing do well in the United States. I've never seen that since I was born in the 90s. So to me, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking wrong, but I could be 100% wrong, and you could be 100% right, Chris. But
I don't think it's a matter of right and wrong. I think it's just trying to figure out
it's confusing
where we're going in next year and how to best position ourselves to basically not take as much risk, but have the most upside possible. The only effective strategy that I know that typically works in scenarios like that is waiting for these unjustified corrections and then buying them. And that's it. That's the only thing that I've ever seen really work, but I don't know. The great thing is the US, it's one of the most innovative countries on the planet. Whatever the problem comes, we tend to be really good at solving them. So long term, US is going to be fine. The question is 2025 going to be a transitional year, a growth year, or is it going to be a recession year? So we'll see.
Do you want to tackle this one?
What is it?
Sorry,
Chris, I don't understand why companies selling off CAG, then the drug company. What is that? CAG, KHC.
Conagra, the
Conagra,
and then Kraft Heinz.
And then drug companies, because RFK, the drugs they have say people are helping. I'm not sure what the question is.
I guess he's wondering why Conagra and Kraft Heinz are being sold off while the rest of the market is rallying.
Oh, RFK is just saying get all that bullshit that's out of the supply chain, right? So Conagra probably uses certain pesticides, uses certain things in its food mechanism that could theoretically be targeted. Same thing with Kraft Heinz. Kraft Heinz might be putting some stuff in the food to let it preserve, basically making it longer, make it have longer shelf life, but it's bad for you, like a lot of preservatives. In which case, if the regulatory environment says, hey, stop putting that shit in your food, that's going to impact their bottom line.
You think that's what's going on with Eli Lilly as well? Just taking a quick look, it took a pretty steep tumble here in the beginning of November.
Eli Lilly's been dealing with its hottest product, the Ozempic. Basically, like all the compounding pharmacies and everyone else, kind of like really being, forward with those products, and so maybe they're losing out on some market share, not market share, but basically they're not making as much money as they had originally hoped for. With Ozempic, like semaglutide, you can buy it through a compounding pharmacy like Hims, right? So why would you pay these guys all this extra money for these GLP-1s when you could get it? The one to look at is type in VKTX, Viking Therapeutics. I keep hearing about these guys. And the thing is, they have a drug, a GLP-1 medication.
A mouth, oral.
Oral, yes. Yeah. So instead of having to basically take an injection, you just take a pill, and from what I can tell, the early studies have been pretty good. So I don't know what it's going to end up doing, guys. Don't look at me like, oh my God, Chris said this is going to go up. No, it's still in research phase. I think I don't know what part of the trial they're in, but I know some people are very bullish on this one. So
I remember looking at it a couple of months back. I think you had mentioned it to me, but it is already a $6 billion company, right? Up 400% year to date. So
but dude, the total market, the TAM is huge though for that.
Yeah,
huge. Yeah. So,
like you said, competition is getting fierce, right? And so I don't know if everybody takes their slice of the pie. Eli and Novo Nordisk, those guys were early to the game. Hims obviously expanded pretty rapidly as well because of the fact that they were able to, but they took a 25% hit today just based off of what happened with Amazon. Shout out to Amit. I was listening to his stream. Check this bad boy out. They basically noted that they'll be able to expand what they're able to serve from an Amazon Amazon Health perspective, and boom, 25% right off the market cap. And I know a lot of people have been buying more and more into Hims, and on a year-to-date basis, you guys are perfectly fine, but there might be some more headwinds. Who knows? Or it could.
Okay,
it could
so
the
only
direction. Curious your thoughts.
Here's a question to you. Did Tesla sell off 25% because Rivian came out? Just because Amazon starts something does not mean that they will succeed at a business. Will it present competition? Yes, that's how it works. There are always going to be big guys competing, right? It doesn't mean everyone and their mother is going to be switching from Hims tomorrow morning and saying, oh, they might just go to Amazon Pharmacy all of a sudden. If Hims can differentiate themselves with better quality products, with better service, with good pricing, they should be fine and they should keep growing. Okay. First mover advantage. That's absolutely right. I think a lot of people, what happens is a new competitor comes. No, it's completely out of business now. So I'd say just keep that in mind, with regards to Hims. I'm not saying that.
I don't think you're wrong on that. Yeah. Sometimes the first advantage mover ends up being stolen. Look at BlackBerry and the smartphone, right? Obviously now we know where BlackBerry is comparatively to Apple. I would say Apple, the iPhone was probably the true, I don't know, I'm sure there was other competitors, but in terms of a true competitor to the BlackBerry, I think that, they obviously took advantage of being the number two. So anyway, I agree with you, but it's something to be cautious about, right?
Yeah, of course. Look at what Crossroads put. Amazon entered the car market and Carvana sold off. But look at where Carvana is now. So sometimes what happens is if you can have a differentiated product you've got first mover advantage, and you do such a great job in your niche, you'll keep growing. You're still doing well. No one's gonna be like, oh yeah, let me go for this other product. Just because a new competitor comes out to Coke doesn't necessarily mean that tomorrow morning Coke sales are going down by 25%. So, but people freak out when they see competition. Of course, that's just how things are,
Always.
Now, here's the thing. If Hims keep selling off, definitely something that me and you should keep an eye on because they are doing way better in their total metrics,
Sort of metrics meaning their ops margins or
Yeah, their margins, their growth rate, all that stuff is still intact. They're doing well. They're I like the fact that they're very, how do I say, like there seems to be operating on all cylinders. I didn't get into this like too early. I wish I had got into it. Like, you remember Adam Bergman? Adam was
yep.
in this like hard at like $8.
Yeah, I was wrong. I remember a year or so ago, people asked me to review it, and I think it was one of the episodes you couldn't make, and I was reviewing it, and it gave me scary vibes because I was looking at their marketing expense, and it gave me like Wish vibes. And the reason
Yeah,
why I was a big Wish investor because I kept seeing the year over year customer count go up. But
yeah,
basically, what it was is they were taking revenue and sinking it directly into marketing. Well, the thing with
yeah,
Wish is they didn't have the customer service or the approval. And so they were spending all this money on marketing, getting people through the door, but people weren't coming back because of the quality. And so that was kind of the difference between Hims and Wish. And so the thought process was for me, I'm seeing all this revenue go directly into marketing. Holy shit, you better hope the retention rate on these marketing calls are good. And
yeah,
luckily for Hims, people stayed, right? The service. So technically they were able to continue to grow and not just throw money after bad money. And they were able to retain clients. So I think that's why Hims has been extremely successful. My fear was I kept seeing Instagram ads and random people talk about Hims, and I'm sitting here like, I don't know, this seems really fishy. And sometimes
yeah,
those things can be fishy, right? Remember FTX was everywhere. You see some of these
yeah,
things, and sometimes it's too good to be true, and
yeah,
you can be wrong. You don't win every home run,
yeah.
and so I stayed away from it. But congratulations to everybody that stuck with it. I know some
Yeah, I
people have done
mean,
really well.
you look at their revenue. Revenue is just nice, great pace, and it's like re-accelerating. So it was 50% on a TTM base, and now it's 56%. Gross profit. Look at this, up and to the right. R&D and selling. I mean, it's going up, but like not nearly as much growth in that. R&D didn't really spend a lot in R&D. Operating income. Now they're positive in operating income. Investment income is there because they probably have some cash pile. I mean, their margins are improving. Look at this. EBITDA margin is getting like literally went from negative 40% to now positive 3%. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an interesting company to look at, and especially if they can keep growing at the pace that they're growing, they'll be fine. Net income, they almost had 100 million in net income. So operating cash flow is almost 200 million.
Mm.
So, yeah, man.
Let me ask you one. Let's pull up one that we haven't talked about in a while.
Okay, we need to talk about this one, by the way, before we do that. But go ahead. Which one are you want to talk
I was
about?
going to say Celsius and how shitty of a quarter they had.
Dude, it was rough.
So let me ask the question: the revenue being down 30%, it was something like 30% on a year over year basis. Did you grant that to be specifically the fact that Pepsi over ordered in the first few quarters and they were finally starting to choke back, or do you equate that
Clear,
to?
clear as day, dude. Look at this. You see this right here? This not net income, sorry. Let me just go to its revenue. Okay. So
Good. I
look at
hope Rocket Lab
Celsius.
goes back to fucking $8. I hope it
Who
does.
says that? Who
No, I
says
hope
that?
it does. Somebody said it's back at 16. I'm happy. I'm ecstatic.
Okay. Okay.
I'm gonna
So
buy twice as many shares. I can't wait. Sorry.
all right. So yeah, so their revenue growth you can see has been, accelerating really good, but the problem is their growth rate has slowed down significantly, right? So basically what happened was you can see that, it was doing really well. It was it was everywhere. Pepsi bought in and basically boosted up their inventories, but now they're working their channel down and they're trying to figure out like a normalized growth rate that's going to happen in the future. But what that's doing is basically in the short term playing against the year over year figures. Because I mean, when you're comping against something that was growing at 100% the year before, that's not easy. You're not going to be able to comp that hard. So you can see that their growth rates were really, really up there the last few years, which means that you're comping against some really tough numbers. The challenge though is that if you look on an annual basis, the revenue is still was still higher, right? I mean, it was still higher up to the last quarter, and then it was a sharp drop. So this right here could be that inventory clearing that's happening for Celsius. The question is, will they be able to reaccelerate this in the future? And if they are, then it's something to look into.
Yeah, I mean, I have some puts that are underwater. Worst case scenario, if I get put, I'll lose 10 grand. But my hope is that they do a turnaround. I'm still seeing a lot of people drink them. Maybe I'm biased by my Palantir folks, and they apparently live off of and are pretty much fueled entirely by drinking Celsius. I don't even know if they eat food. I was actually very surprised that you saw Eliano drinking a coffee and not a Celsius, and putting cocoa over a Celsius. But I don't necessarily know if it's something that's going to last forever. I'm just surprised, just based off the rhetoric that we heard in 1Q and 2Q from Pepsi, the slowdown. But it seems like Pepsi is still very bullish overall with them. So I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. I know that when you have some of these phone conversations and earnings calls, things are kind of delayed by a quarter or two, especially if you're getting a situation like that started up. So I don't know. I'm just trying to read through the tea leaves a little bit. I might give it 2 more quarters with Celsius with these puts and just letting them kind of sit there. I personally have a kind of an inkling that the bottom is in, but I'm not diving both feet into the pool. And I want people to hear that. We have that single share in the portfolio.
Share the portfolio. What are we up to now? Let's take a look.
We're down slightly from the past few days. Last time you and I chatted, but it's not awful. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I took a gamble. We did cover the important numbers. So here we are. As always, the highest value item is on the top, all the way to the smallest value, which once again, we were just chatting about Celsius, $26 a share. Brookfield Partners still hanging in there strong, 11% return. Undisclosed LNG company, $39. Vornado, just under 2.5% loss. BPYPM, 27%. Carnival and NCLH pulled back a little bit today, but overall up almost 60% a piece. Bitcoin, 36%. Cash, we have $128. HIMS, we're up $55. China, we are down about $16 overall. Chris, you owe me $16, man. ABCL, we are down 15, and then Celsius, we're down because we started a starter position at $47.
That was Matt. That was Matt.
That was me.
That was Matt. That was.
I wanted to keep an eye on it.
Yeah. I don't know, brother. I have no clue what we're going to do.
So I want to ask you about it. I'm not upset by any means. It's $16, right? Obviously, I have the next slide to show you. So when you see the next slide, you'll see why I'm not so much concerned. But the China rhetoric, do you think that that's kind of like a wait and hold, or do you think that that's something where you're gonna?
Yeah, just wait and hold. I think it's definitely a wait and hold. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
There are some new companies that we should take a look at of deploying some future capital. But I think right now, maybe we should just stack cash until we get a better idea of what's going on with regards to like the Trump's policy. What do you think about that?
We'll have to talk about which companies, but you wanted to bring up what you were talking about with Tanner yesterday. But before we do and go back to that, we'll probably end the show with that because you did a good job talking about it yesterday on Tanner's channel. Where do you think we're at? Where do you think we are for the year-end returns? We got a month and a half left.
I don't know. Maybe let's see. 60%. Maybe we took a little bit of a tumble.
Bro,
so 60%.
You're better than that.
70%? I don't know, man. Come on.
You hate me.
77%.
We were at 80% last week, my guy.
I know, but we were down a little bit on some of our names. Luckily, our positioning is good enough to the point where we we can always redeploy. So I don't know.
Matty Mullah's biggest mistakes of the year. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
I sold Rocket Lab in this portfolio. That would have dragged us up a couple percentage points. But guess who didn't sell Rocket Lab in their personal portfolio? Hey, no, I'm just kidding. And then I don't know. I forget.
So Michael was like Celsius is Chris. No, Chris got out at the highs. So Chris is not a rocket. I mean, I bought in a little bit on Celsius, but I dumped the position after their.
I concur. Celsius was 100% Chris. No, I'm just kidding. So Celsius was me. I'm sitting on 10 grand loss selling it at the moment. I'm waiting for it to turn around. Let's be honest. I mean, 10 grand. I don't want to make it. I'm just going to sound like a dickish thing. 10 grand. If I lose 10 grand on the trade, it's not a big deal. And so to me, I'm just kind of looking at it like I'm looking at it as something that I can get in. I got in too early and it can ride back to more of like a $40, $50 position where I think it's probably more appropriate to be. But they have to stop fucking cratering year over year in revenue, right? So if that ends up in a second quarter in a row, or a third quarter in a row where they have declining year-over-year revenues, that's kind of scary. So, yes, why did I sell my highest conviction stock? Because I personally had a few tens of thousands of shares. We had like, I don't know, I forget how many shares. It wasn't a very large position of the portfolio. And I was just like, you know what? You know what I'm not doing in my personal portfolio? Selling. But what I am doing, I think it got to like $8 or $9. I thought it was going to have a pullback. It did not. It kept
Rocket
running.
Lab is down $5 overnight, by the way.
Not overnight, but I guess maybe you're right. I guess
no, it's over. It's selling off right now.
Yeah, it's at $16.95. Which I'm happy.
I'm just messing with you, dude.
No, I thought you meant because it peaked at $22, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I have puts wrote to Kingdom Come to buy more shares. So
you sold puts? You sold puts?
Of course, I sold puts on
Rocket Lab.
Yeah,
what price? What stock?
All over $10, $15.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So I even have some for January 2027 for $25.
You wrote puts for that?
Yeah, so I could get the premium, and I bought calls at like $5. So I used the premium. It's a synthetic long, right? So I sold in the money puts because I'm like by January 2027. I mean, of course I'm fucked if it's only a couple contracts. We're not talking about 50 contracts here, but I basically said like I'm okay using 5 to 10 grand as collateral. I forget what number I'm up to now, but I was like I'm okay using 5 to 10 grand in collateral. Using the premium that I get from that, it was like in the money. So I think technically let me just explain the trade. I sold, this is before the run up recently. So this is before earnings. I think it was at $13, $14 or whatever. I don't know, somewhere between 13 to 15. I sold $25 puts. I got $14 in change and premium. So that means my break even would have been $10, $11 on the trade had I had to buy the shares. But between now and January 2027, I used that premium to buy 150% more in contracts in $5 calls for January 2027. So I basically said, let me take this premium. Instead of using it and getting a break even of X, I'm going to use that premium to buy long calls. So now I control however many shares of $5 calls, which is basically if the stock runs, it's a 1-for-1 pretty much. It's like a 94% delta or something, or 94 delta or something like that. So basically if the stock runs, I'm getting a 1-for-1 on either side because I'm so far in the money. And then I'm also in the puts, but then also I'm in the money on the calls. So the calls going up also helps. So it's pretty interesting in that respect. But of course, if the stock stays stagnant, then I lose all my premium, and technically I have to buy those shares for $25 a share. But my thought process is by January 2027, there's going to be so many catalysts, profitability, the Neutron launch. By that point, we should have launched the rocket 3 or 4 times. If that's the case, then we're going after Falcon 9. We're probably going to be north of the $12.5 billion market cap, which is what it would be if you're at $25 a share. So I think I'd be okay. Worst case scenario as well is like I have those $5 calls, which I think I bought for I think like 10 or 11 bucks. No, it's $9. So my break even on those is like $13 or $14. So even if it goes to say $20 or $22, I don't even break the $25 puts. I can just roll out 6 months or whatever I need to do. I've captured, let's just say, majority of that premium already. Plus I have the leaps that I bought with it. So anyway, maybe it's a stupid move. Maybe in 2 years you guys can poke fun at me, be like, haha, just remember like how Matt bought Wish. He bought Rocket Lab. He's an idiot. Feel free. I don't care. And it's all fake money anyway. Fucking government keeps printing more of it. So I'll stop
Are there
on my
any
little tangent.
So we'll talk about Grab next episode. And there's also another thing we could talk about, some commercial real estate, because it's getting to I got to get out of here. So sorry for everyone who was looking for
SLG has
Grab.
been taking a little bit of a tumble the past few days. So.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's with the higher interest rates that's probably impacting, like overall future profitability. But there is an opportunity for us, because one of the things that people are missing out on is leasing rates are starting to recover for commercial real estate a lot. So that's helping like their bottom line. So it's a combination of, yes, will interest hurt a little bit, like in terms of like their overall profitability? Yes. But at the same time, you're seeing, 70% occupied buildings now get back to 100% occupied, and that's a huge boost. So you don't, that impact from higher interest rates is going to be very muted when you compare, better occupancy levels. So, and better leasing rates also. Like, so if you look at, like some major cities, their commercial leasing rates are getting back to what they were like, prior to COVID. Like, here's an example of something. So
this is good news for me, because my break even on my house was less than what I was paying for my 1-bedroom apartment downtown. So, I mean, if I'm able to get leases at $2,500 a month, I'd be all about that.
Yeah. Well, I meant more on the commercial side. I'm not so sure about housing side. Yeah. So commercial real estate, you can see that it was like 2020, 22 and 23 were the correction years for commercial real estate. But everywhere I look right now, you're starting to see commercial like leases starting to come back. So that whole thing with CNC BRE actually would beat out better than anticipated results, drive 18% gain. So CBRE does like real estate brokerage specifically for commercial real estate. They're partnered with Brookfield. So this is something that we should all keep our eye on, because I think this can provide tremendous value as a recovery for the next couple of years. So I think a lot of these big time commercial real estate companies who have like a lot of office buildings, the offices are starting to get occupied again. So the work from home thing is starting to go down. And one of the things that I've seen with regards to the Trump administration is that they seem to be very much anti work from home, not only for its federal bureaucracy, but also for corporations as well. And then now you're seeing a hardline stance from a lot of corporations telling their workers, either you come into work 5 days a week or you find a job somewhere else. And I think that heavy-handedness is eventually going to get back. So back to office 5 days per week next year. So someone who's at Laura, how did that happen? Your boss just told you, like, listen, you got to come back to the office. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Hey man, yeah. Some companies were very adamant about it in 2021. Some took 2022.
How about you? Are you still working from home? Like, how often?
I personally go into the office just because I it's hard for me to concentrate at home. If like I can concentrate really well when it comes to like doing live streaming, doing research on stocks, etc., because that's just my passion. Right. So I immediately kind of go to that. And not to say that oil and gas isn't my passion, but it's kind of a secondary passion compared to the markets. So I personally go into the office just so I can concentrate and segregate in my head. Like if I'm at the office, I'm doing, and I still check on the markets, right? Don't get me wrong. But, when I'm there, I'm focusing on work 9 to 5. And then when I'm here, I concentrate on, either YouTube or investing, etc. So it's really hard. Even on Fridays, for example, sometimes it's hard for me to concentrate, and I sometimes wish I go into the office on Fridays. Sometimes I do, just because if I need to get something done, it's hard for me to kind of concentrate. But generally speaking, I get enough done Monday through Thursday that Fridays are pretty light, and I can answer a few calls, get a few things done, wrap up things for the next week, and get things prepared. And I'm not stressing too hard. And generally, I can close the laptop by like 3:30 or 4, especially even earlier if I have calls with the UK. Then I'm on making calls at sometimes 7 a.m., 7:30. So sometimes I can get out an hour or two earlier. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah, man, let's call it there. For those of you guys that could, please be sure to check out the Twitch. Obviously, if it's only, don't feel obligated to watch from there, only if it's something that you prefer, just trying to access a new audience. And then as well, Mr. Patel always has his Patreon in the description. It is back open for business. Him, Sam, ET, FaceTime Home, all do a pretty good job being very responsive in the Discord. It's always nice discourse in there. And then sometimes from time to time, I'm in there as well. Sometimes I can get snappy though with my responses, so be wary. What else is there? That's pretty much it, man. We'll talk about grab next time.
Okay, sounds good, man.
Yep. You guys rock. Let's kick it off with a little bit of a outro. How about that?
Greed is good.
The stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in fucking circles. It's all a fugazi.
Sell it all.
Greed is good. Huge upside potential, upwards of $60,000.